Story 1. I was giving a presentation to over 300 people and rested my arm on a spot on the podium where there was a button that turned the entire system off. Took about 10 minutes to reboot and get my presentation back up. 2 minutes into speaking again, I accidentally did it once more. Story 2. This one makes me laugh when I think about it. I was 16, pushing grocery carts outside a grocery store. Lot attendant was my title, and my job was to ensure chaos didn't break out in the parking lot. But I also had other duties like taking out the trash, emptying ashtrays, and doing a few odd jobs around the store. One day, a woman tapped me on the shoulder in the store and said, "I'm sorry, but my child just threw up over that display." She pointed at a display of Entenmann's snack cakes that was freestanding between some aisles. I could see that this toddler had clearly projectile vomited all over it. There was some on most of the boxes. I thought, I'll handle this. So I scooped up all the boxes, took them out to the dumpster, and threw them away. As I dusted my hands off and congratulated myself on being so helpful, a manager asked, "What did you just do?" I replied, "I cleaned up a big mess. A child threw up on everything." He responded, "Yeah, but you can't just throw a whole display away. There's a process inventory. We have to report these losses." I said, "I push shopping carts, ma'am. I don't know anything about any of that." He let out a long sigh and said, "This isn't going to be fun for either of us." Then he lowered me by my ankles back into the dumpster, and I had to fish out all the snack cake boxes covered in vomit and learn how to scan them through some kind of computer. And in case you're wondering, I haven't eaten an Entenmann's snack cake since. Story 3. Long ago, I was in information technology and was moving data volumes online and offline. I misread an 8 for a 0 and took the airline's reservation system down for 30 minutes. At a cost of $2 million per hour, oops. I immediately reported what I did. The manager said, "You know what you did, and I know it won't ever happen again." Yes, I was sorry. I continued on to have a long career in information technology, clearly never forgetting that lesson and response. Story 4. I was on vacation when my boss asked me to run a script written by another employee before he quit. I was at Disneyland and didn't take the time to review it, so I just executed it. As a result, the former employee locked all our computers, totaling 25,000. They tried to blame me, but ultimately my boss faced consequences for making me work during my vacation without any time to prepare. Story 5. I needed to cut a 2-inch rubber hose. There wasn't a table nearby, so I placed the hose on my knee and accidentally pushed the box cutter through the hose, directly into my knee. Sometimes the brain just doesn't work. Story 6. I am a brand new manager trainee. I had to sit through outdated occupational safety and health administration videos. It was all content I had seen before, and I was incredibly bored. At the end of the video, there was a random person in our office whom I assumed was a customer, and I sarcastically remarked, "Well, that was an hour I'll never get back." He responded, "Did you not enjoy it?" I replied, "No, not at all. But I understand that safety comes first, so it's necessary. However, the videos are so basic that it hurts. Anyway, can I help you quickly? I have a meeting to attend with a senior representative from the corporate merchandising team who is going to be here in an hour or two." He responded, "I'm filling in for the senior representative from corporate. I'm the North American Safety Director. Let's discuss your vision for safety in our workplace since you seem to have that all figured out." Story 7. I am an assistant. During my second week on the job, I took my boss's $2,000 personal computer to get repaired. On my way back to his house, I accidentally dropped it and cracked the screen. Fortunately, it was a small crack, and my boss is very easygoing. I genuinely thought I might get fired, but he simply started using it again and said it was no big deal since it still worked. Story 8. A large printer, one of those office units, had a manual switch to go between 220 and 110 volts. Halfway around the world, a coworker forgot to change the switch to the correct voltage and damaged the power supply. It will take a week to get a replacement unit, but my coworker needs to leave for his wedding. A week later, I fly out to finish his job and install the new unit. I forget to check the voltage and damage it again. A lady at work replied to a promotion notice with, "This person doesn't work at all, just takes credit for our work," and sent it to everyone. Story 9. I was filling a paint drum and left to use the bathroom. Then I went on break, and midway through a snack, I realized I had left paint everywhere, so I ran all the way back. Story 10. I forgot to turn the sign to open. A coworker discovered this after he came out and asked why the place was empty. I watched 5 people come to the door, stop, turn, and walk away. I was hungover and stood at the counter like a zombie for an hour and a half, witnessing many people approach and then leave. My coworkers greeted me until I resigned myself to saying, "Are we open?" Story 11. I accidentally deleted the entire project directory for my company while thinking I was deleting a folder called Proposals. We lost about 2/3 of the directory before I was able to cancel the deletion. The data was gone because the folder was too large to fit in the trash, so it was permanently deleting files as it continued. Story 12. Working in payroll means that mistakes of $5,000 to $10,000 are not uncommon. I was testing a new warning and deduction code on a new account and entered $5,000 as a test check, forgetting to delete it before processing for a terminated employee, who promptly emptied his bank account, making it impossible to retrieve the funds. Even worse, a coworker rerouted approximately 15 to 20 direct deposits to her own account. All changes are easily traceable with username and timestamp records, so she was promptly fired and I believe arrested. Story 13. On my first day working for a cleaning company, the first thing I did was pick up a mop from the bucket vertically instead of at an angle, which caused the overhead strip light above me to shatter while I was talking to my boss. Story 14. I accidentally put an adrenaline needle through my thumb while messing around with returned stock at a pharmacy during the disposal of old medication. Our old-fashioned pharmacist and owner would always prime the adrenaline injectors and stab them into the wall to get rid of the liquid before disposing of it. One day, I stupidly tried to do this myself, but I squeezed the wrong end while attempting to prime it, and the needle went right through my thumb and out the other side, popping through my thumbnail. I felt like such an idiot. The needle wasn't actually used. It was just expired stock that a patient had returned. Nearly 15 years later, I still think about what could have happened. Story 15. Many years ago, during my early military career, I was responsible for ordering supplies for my division. I attempted to order D batteries for mag lights and wanted about 38 cases, totaling 380 batteries. However, I misread the order specifications and mistakenly thought the order was by each, leading me to request 380 batteries. That was my first mistake. My second mistake occurred when I accidentally entered 3,800 instead. To further complicate the situation, the unit of issue was by the case. As a result, I ended up with 3,800 cases of D batteries while at sea on an aircraft carrier. It was a difficult situation. Story 16. I took a new medication at work that made me act as if I were very drunk. It was so embarrassing and foolish. I should have tried the new medication at home first. Story 17. We were in an all-hands meeting over Zoom. It was a small company with about 90 employees. We had just hired 6 new people, mostly remote. The CEO ended the meeting by opening it up to questions. I wanted to sound welcoming to the new employees, but I didn't want to turn on my microphone. So I typed in the chat, "Where are all the new employees located?" and immediately hit send. Except I didn't type new. I accidentally hit J on the keyboard instead of N. I didn't proofread before sending, so I asked the entire company where the Jewish employees are located. I immediately followed up with new *OMG, I'm so sorry, and my CEO handled it like a pro. The best part was that one of the Jewish employees messaged me after the meeting to tell me where he was located. Story 18. My boss assigned me the task of depositing our cash earnings from the week at the bank down the road. I walked to my car, placed the bag on top, and drove away happily. Story 19. A middle-aged female in another department was unmuted while taking a personal call on her cell phone. All 265 people on the call could hear her answering the phone and talking while hearing the distinct sounds of her activities. Despite the CEO and group directors calmly telling her to mute, she thought she was muted the entire time and had the volume set so low that she couldn't hear people asking her to mute. Almost 5 minutes into the call, we could hear the toilet paper rolling in the dispenser before she abruptly went quiet and left the meeting. This was not a work-from-home position. Story 20. A 3D sensor we make slipped from my hands and dropped on the floor. I felt so bad. We sell those for $100,000. Nothing broke. We just had to fix the laser and camera alignments. We have a tradition now. If you drop a sensor, your name will be written on the floor where the hole left in the flooring material is. Story 21. I renamed all customers' last names to the same last name. I don't remember why I was doing an update but forgot to include the where clause. Thankfully, I had a way to restore them, but that was frustrating. It was probably to fix something unusual with the name, like removing a special character that was pasted into the field and causing issues with other processes. I dislike any name that has an apostrophe, like O'Neill, because vendors struggle with CSV sanitizing. Story 22. I ordered 6 American Society of Mechanical Engineers water heaters in 3-phase configuration for a job. There was no 3-phase electrical supply anywhere on the job site. If you're not familiar with plumbing, American Society of Mechanical Engineers heaters are made to order and non-returnable. You cannot convert them in the field to the correct electrical configuration. $9,000 each. My boss was not happy. I thought I was about to get fired. Luckily, we were able to make it up elsewhere later on. Story 23. A typo in a technical report turned 101.0 into 1010. The minimum standard was 100, so it passed with flying colors. However, due to natural production variation, there were soon many expensive problems. Story 24. My first job was as a cart boy at a golf course. I pulled all the carts in for the night but forgot to plug them in. Most were dead by morning on Sunday. I was fired on Monday. Story 25. I was a tank crewman in the Army as a gunner. After we completed one of our gunnery tables, which you can think of as training exercises where you drive around and shoot targets, then get graded on time, accuracy, and proper fire commands, we reported in for grading. One particular engagement, I felt confident. Our commands were on point, we were quick, and my aim was spot on. It included a moving target, which was a plywood cutout of a truck that moved on rails and was heated from behind so we could pick it up on thermal sights. During the grading, the feedback was, well, your time was good, fire commands were perfect, and your aim was dead on. But unfortunately, we have to give you 0 points for this engagement because your target was actually over here on this hillside. What you hit was a badger. In the recording from the tower's infrared camera, it was clear that a poor badger was minding its own business, waddling along the hillside that I hit with a 120mm sabot round. I felt terrible. It was a hell of a shot, though. Story 26. My second week at my current job, I backed into and knocked over a light pole. The worst part was that it was captured on video. Story 27. I was working at a retail hardware store about 25 years ago. I had to make the cash deposit and drop it off at the bank's night drop. I forgot to go to the bank and went directly home instead. I didn't think about it anymore. The cash bag containing over $10,000 in cash and checks was waiting for me in the car the next morning. I didn't even lock my car doors. Story 28. During a Teams meeting, I thought I was on mute. A person I dislike arrived a couple of minutes late, and I accidentally said, "Finally decided to show up." Story 29. I connected my pump the wrong way and put 1,200 psi into my hose valve, which blew the test cock off and flooded the stairwell with a large amount of water. Story 30. I worked at a restaurant for many months, and it was great. I never heard a complaint. One day, they decided they needed more help and offered my friend the job. In less than 6 months, trouble started arising everywhere. I will never work with a friend again. Story 31. I ate a cookie a customer gave me. Oh no, those were for later. Yeah, I could tell by the aftertaste. Thanks though. I'll just spend the rest of the day on maintenance tasks away from customers. Luckily, I'm the boss, so I put on my headphones and started fixing things around the shop. I informed my main manager about the mistake, and he didn't send anyone my way for the rest of the day. I definitely got teased for that one every time I brought in baked goods for the team for years. Story 32. I was working on an automatic failover in a Cisco adaptive security appliance for our main external interface and accidentally set up a network address translation loop that caused the entire organization to lose external communication for 2 days while we searched through the access control lists to identify the issue. In my defense, it took 4 layers of technical assistance center escalation and 6 Cisco engineers to discover the problem. 150 employees suddenly found themselves without any work. No email, no internet, no connection to any cloud services, nothing. My boss remarked that you aren't a cowboy until you've experienced a setback. In other words, when you're working hard, things can go wrong. Learn from it and move forward. Story 33. I left a job where I had very little to do and spent my days watching movies. Yet I was paid the minimum wage. Now, I have a job where I'm constantly busy, but I'm still earning the minimum wage. Story 34. I worked in a mental hospital as a janitor. I had been there for about a week when someone said I needed to clean a part one had never cleaned before. It was a wing that had a security desk and a locked door. Halfway through mopping the floor, the entire place locked down because one of the violent patients got out, and I didn't know I had to lock the door since the security staff was out to lunch. That ward was an isolation unit for violent individuals who were there on court orders or were sentenced. Thankfully, the person who got out just went to the day room and turned on the TV. When the nurses said he had to go back, he complied. The janitor responsible for that ward was off sick, and I had never even been to that side of the hospital before. I wasn't informed of any special rules or protocols. Story 35. I forwarded an email to a coworker that included a link to a viral video everyone was discussing that month. Unfortunately, I forgot to use my personal email instead of my work email, and my boss intercepted the message. I was fired the next morning, just a week before Christmas. In the grand scheme of things, it all worked out for the best. I ended up at a much better job making twice as much money, but I still feel foolish about it. Story 36. Connecting duct to a new heat pump, I accidentally drilled a screw through the copper refrigerant piping. In the basement of a very wealthy and influential family's vacation home. Story 37. I delivered funeral flowers to a hospital room where the person was very much alive. I didn't realize it until I was about to deliver the get well soon flowers to the wake. Story 38. An attorney at a large New York law firm, where I worked as a paralegal, knew I was taking a trip to Amsterdam. I sent my out-of-office email to the litigation team, and he replied to all with pothead slacker. He was gone the next day. Poor guy. Story 39. I spilled a Bloody Mary on the lap of a very wealthy American who had just told me he was on his way to Heathrow. He was wearing a cream linen suit. He mentioned that his baggage had gone ahead, that he was having brunch and then heading to the airport. I don't think I've ever seen someone look at me with such anger in their eyes, before or since. Story 40. I once sent an important email to the entire company, but forgot to attach the critical document everyone needed. Story 41. I practice criminal law. During a drunk driving trial, I mistakenly used the word circumscribed while questioning a witness. However, I actually said circumcised instead. I repeated it twice. During the break, the court reporter asked me why I said that. I didn't believe her until she played it back for me. I had indeed said it. Story 42. Why filter for a laser chiller at $100? I found the same filter on McMaster-Carr for $50, saving the lab $50 every 6 months. However, the McMaster filter, while having the same specifications, contained cellulose, which caused approximately $15,000 worth of pump diodes to fail around 10,000 hours prematurely. We only identified the issue when the second set of diodes also died prematurely. Story 43. It was not really an error, but I worked at a Midwest bank headquarters, and the lady who normally pays off the bank's borrowed money when the bonds mature had to be at a conference in North Carolina for a week. She left me instructions to pay off a $103 million loan that was due while she was gone. She provided me with a deposit/withdrawal slip from the bank's own account and the wiring instructions. I was to fill out the slip and, at exactly 3 p.m., go to the 5th floor wire room, ask for the designated lady, and hand her the slip along with the wiring instructions to the depository trust company in New York. The withdrawal slip did not have enough amount boxes for such a large sum. It only covered up to $99,999,999.99. So, I had to get another slip and break the payment into two sums, one for $50 million and one for $53 million. The lady in the wire office did not know who I was. For all she knew, I could have been a dishonest employee wiring $103 million of the bank's money to my own offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The issue was that the interest on such a large amount exceeded my daily wage just dealing with her for an hour. Finally, I had to go back to corporate trust and get a bank vice president to countersign the request, or she would not send the wire. Had she not done so, the bank would have missed its repayment, which could lead to a lowered credit rating. Not to mention the bank's shares would fall due to a missed payment. None of those vice presidents would countersign because they didn't know or trust me either. They thought I could be stealing from the bank and refused. I had to go to the bank president to explain the situation, and he was clearly unhappy. However, he called the wire office and instructed them to accept my slips and send them as soon as they received them, before the depository trust company closed. If they did not, I would have to fly to New York and be at the depository trust company when they opened with the money. I disliked that job, but that is my memorable story of the time I had to write a check for $103 million. Story 44. I am personally responsible for a United States Navy warship losing all power and going completely dark in the middle of the night in the Pacific Ocean for almost half an hour. I also am responsible for flipping a switch that resulted in a mass killing of fish large enough that local media covered the event and speculated on the possible causes. Story 45. I was running chips in a casino. I had a cart of large chips set to a specific amount, and I was coloring tables by taking small denominations and giving back $100 chips. The balance of my cart should never change. If I buy $5,000 worth of $25 chips, I give $5,000 worth of $100 chips. At one table, I took $500 more than I gave, putting my cart over by $500. I reported the mistake to my supervisors so they could check the cameras and see where the error occurred. Between reporting that mistake and the next time I balanced my cart, I disorganized it poorly. I buried the large chips under the small chips, which threw my count off even further. The chips were there, but I was counting them incorrectly due to bad organization. I had to report the second non-existent mistake to my supervisors. 10 minutes later, the surveillance supervisor came to take the $500 and show me where the mistake was in my cart. Nothing major happened, but I felt like a complete fool for days. Story 46. The wrong furniture was delivered to a house, and they wouldn't return it. The company I worked for didn't care and told me to move on, even though they provided the wrong address for the delivery. They attempted to deduct the cost from my paycheck, so I decided to resign with 2 weeks' notice. Story 47. I got involved with a married coworker who I later learned was just going through all the new male employees. Story 48. I installed a pocket door into a wall because I forgot to switch to shorter nails when using my brad nailer. Story 49. I used to make soup in a factory for a living, and you are supposed to use specific ingredients for each batch because of different allergens. I accidentally mixed 2 different containers of noodles together, totaling over 1,000 pounds. I was mortified by my mistake, but my boss calmly waved it off and said not to do it again. It probably helped my case that I was one of their best workers and that it was around 140 degrees in the factory that day. Story 50. I worked at a graduate school in online education. I was trying to delete a class site and accidentally deleted the entire semester's worth of class sites. Fortunately, we had backups and my supervisor was very understanding. I panicked, reported the error, and went to cry at my then-boyfriend's house, certain I would be fired. I wasn't. Story 51. I was working remotely on an environmental data monitoring system. I had rebooted it a few times. Little did I know that I had shut down a refinery line that took several days to recover. It cost them several $100,000. They should have communicated more clearly before allowing me to connect. Story 52. Back in the day of floppy disks, the manager was working for a week on a job for a presentation for a client, involving numerous spreadsheets. On the day of the presentation, he handed the floppy disk and a blank disk to the new 18-year-old. fresh out of a technical high school with high grades in data processing, to make a backup. The process involved putting the original disk in the drive, running the backup program, and inserting the blank disk. It would then copy the original to the blank disk, as long as the process was not interrupted. My immediate supervisor informed me that he had to advocate for me significantly to keep my job. Story 53. I left the back door unlocked to a pool facility. Thankfully, nobody wandered in and got hurt, but I would have certainly faced negligence charges if they had. Story 54. I ran a customer's credit card and accidentally added an extra zero, turning a $2,300 order into a $23,000 order, and the charge went through. Our accounting personnel caught it at the end of the day when they mentioned the great day we had to my boss. Story 55. One of my first jobs in 1989 involved typesetting and artwork, where I created a menu for a restaurant around the corner. I designed the wine list on the back page and accidentally typed wine list. The spell checker did not detect the error, and no one else noticed it until 2 weeks later when the owner returned the menus, saying, "Look at what you did." Story 56. This time I'm going to be more personable and likable, making more of an effort on the human side. What a mistake. Now I have an incredibly boring guy who acts like he has a crush on me and won't stop talking about the episodes of Futurama he has seen. Story 57. Let's see. I lost a child while working as a ski instructor. That was unfortunate. He was difficult to keep track of, being a non-English speaker who didn't want to listen to my limited Spanish. This took place on a huge mountain, Heavenly Valley. Luckily, a lift operator found him and handed him off to a ski patroller. Then there was the cabinet shop where I worked a couple of years ago. While trying to make a rabbit cut on the table saw, I was lining up my mark with the saw blade at the back. I decided to turn the saw on and move my piece into the blade from the back. That piece of wood flew from my hands. Table saws are incredibly powerful, and I gave that thing a nice chunk of wood to throw at its maximum speed. I ended up putting a hole in the metal garage door that faced the saw. I'm fortunate I was standing to the side. The first incident was not so foolish, but the table saw incident was definitely reckless. Story 58. I asked the Prince of Monaco to step aside because we were expecting a very important person to arrive any second. He was the very important person. Story 59. I sent the wrong door sizes to the framing company. Every door was 1 inch too short. It was for a 212-unit apartment building, and each unit had between 7 and 10 doors. It's surprising how costly 1 inch can be. Story 60. I used to be a realtor. I listed a house, helped the sellers arrange staging, and hired a professional photographer. The listing looked great, there was a lot of interest, and multiple strong offers came in. Everything went unusually smoothly. Driving home from the closing, I was reflecting on how good it felt that the clients were so happy with the price they received and how smoothly everything went, including the photos and staging. Then I realized I had forgotten to notify the stager that the house had sold. All the rented furniture was still in it. If the buyers wanted to be strict, they could keep it all. I immediately called the buyer's agent, but she didn't respond for hours, and I was extremely anxious. I called the stager and confessed to my significant mistake. She quickly sent a team from other tasks to remove the furniture once I finally reached the buyers. I ended up buying gifts for the stager, the buyers, and the buyer's agent. That day was one of the reasons I decided to stop being a realtor. Story 61. I worked at a gas station pumping gas. There were 2 of us, 1 for each island, and it was a slow day, so we were talking while one of the cars on his side was filling up. After a while, we noticed gas leaking from the bottom of the car. My partner shut off the pump quickly to inform the elderly lady about a problem with her gas tank. The lady looked in her side mirror, then turned and quickly glanced over her left shoulder, seeing the pump sticking out of the filler. She then looked up and said, "You didn't, you jerk." Not knowing what was happening, she backed up and got out, screaming at him while opening her trunk. There were 3 or 4 inches of gas poured directly into her trunk, which was full of shopping bags. She berated him, calling him an idiot for using the wrong tank, while the real one was hidden under her license plate. He then called her a rude name just as the owner came over. Basically, The woman's deceased husband had some sort of auxiliary tank installed in the trunk at one time. The filler was on the driver's side with a shiny chrome cap that was hard to miss. My coworker was scolded for the foul language, but the owner understood it was an honest mistake. No real disciplinary action was taken, and the owner took care of the client. Story 62. My boss mentioned in a meeting that he would never make us do something that he had made me do a few weeks earlier. I called him out on it, and he replied that it only happened once. I then responded, "Well, you do one thing like that, and it defines you." That did not go over well. Story 63. Deep into opiate addiction, I also worked with money. Thankfully, I didn't end up in prison. Story 64. I believe the people I hired were not foolish enough to accept a $10,000 check printed on an inkjet printer. Employee. In fairness, he mentioned he didn't have his ID. Story 65. I worked at a semi-truck tire retreading plant. One day, I was walking down the middle of the warehouse with both headphones in, tapping my pen on my clipboard while gazing over the sea of tires before me, trying to count how many of the 315 tires were in the back row. I was then run over by a forklift. Story 66. At 17, I mistook human resources for a reasonable ear while my manager was being a total bully. Human resources is not there to protect you. It is there to protect the company. Story 67. I joked about getting fired to collect unemployment, but then I actually got fired for making the joke and was denied unemployment. Story 68. I accidentally took down a small network for a church. I was eating a donut and looking at a workstation screen trying to solve an issue. The staff at this site were hesitant about turning off monitors to save electricity. One of them mentioned that the monitor next to mine was still on, so without looking, I reached over and hit the power button. The screen I was using stopped responding, and when I got up to check the server, I realized I had hit the power button on the server instead of the monitor. Story 69. I shut down my company's data center switch, causing every single server to lose connection for approximately 4 hours. Why didn't I get fired? They had no backup plans for any form of disaster recovery, and I was brand new. Story 70. I set off a fire alarm while trying to remove some wasps that were attempting to nest in the employee bathroom. It turns out that wasp spray, when sprayed directly into a fire alarm, will trigger it. Story 71. I had just taken over as the cybersecurity vulnerability manager. I set up a Nessus scan for the entire network, over 12,000 individual IP addresses, overnight. What I didn't know was that the scan would take the cameras and door locks offline for the duration of the scan. Not only did I take all the cameras offline at a military installation, but I also caused all the locked doors to fail open, unlocking everything for over an hour. I was called in the middle of the night. I didn't get fired. I fixed the issue going forward. Story 72. Left out a period in the demand deposit system code. Not one overdraft the next day. Story 73. Used to being a custodian for many years, I was leaving the lunchroom one afternoon after mopping it. As I walked down the hallway to the custodian closet to clean the bucket, an annoying 6th grader, who always talked back to everyone, started bothering me. I don't know why I reacted, but I tapped him on the head with the end of the mop. He teared up and said he was going to tell the principal and his parents. I walked home, fearing that the police would come to my house later that evening to arrest me. They never did, and I kept my job. Story 74. Early in my Navy career, I broke an oil purifier. It came in coupled at almost full speed and made a tremendous amount of noise while it was rubbing. My punishment was to order all the replacement parts. My challenge was being skilled at ordering, which became my secondary job until I left. One of the parts was expensive enough to require the commanding officer's approval. Story 75. My biggest mistake was believing that if I worked hard, never slacked off, and only called in when I was really sick, I would move up in the company. It's really about who you know in higher positions that gets you promoted. I've also noticed that they don't want to lose good workers by promoting them. Story 76. I accidentally used my work email as the sender for a promotional email sent to 1,500,000 subscribers. Rest in peace to my inbox for 3 days. Story 77. As a print designer, I made a typo on the sold price of a home for a real estate company. Apparently, people pay attention to that type of mistake to sue for false advertising. The company paid them $30,000, and I did not receive a raise that year. Story 78. Deleted all of the data that the company had been collecting for years. Taught them a lesson about backups though. Story 79. I work in fast food. In a rush and not paying full attention, I have accidentally sent out a burger or two without the actual patty, just a bun and vegetables. Story 80. I thought I had a 0.001 inch tolerance when I actually had a 0.0001 inch tolerance. I was making parts for a submarine. In my defense, it was my first day out of training, and the supervisor misread it as well. Story 81. I accidentally double-billed a client for 5 years, totaling over $30,000. This was a complete oversight on my part. I have since fully restored their account. Story 82. Fresh out of college, I worked in a lab and was about to test a sample from the emergency room. I quickly opened a tube of blood that had a rubber cap suctioned into it. When I opened it towards myself, the force of the pop splashed blood onto my face, lips, and eyes. I felt an internal panic and embarrassment. I froze, quickly wiped it away, and never told anyone. I worked at a children's hospital and convinced myself I'd be okay. That was 14 years ago, and I don't have HIV or anything, so that's a relief. Story 83. The CEO sent out an email about the tornado watch. I replied to all, asking if the watches were complimentary company handouts. Story 84. I used to work as a drink server at a casino. While taking drinks to the craps table, a guy accidentally backed into me, and drinks spilled all over the table during the game. Created chaos. Story 85. I was trying to drill a hole in a piece of steel with a hand drill, but it would not drill at all. I tried a new bit. One of the other guys asked what was up. I told him, and he said, "Let me try." He looked at me and said, "The drill is in reverse." Story 86. I trusted human resources and forgot they are only there to protect the company. I lost my job of 10 years by being naive. Story 87. My first job was at a supermarket, where I helped in the dairy section. I had a little roller cart stacked with gallons of milk, probably 2 wide and 5 high, totaling about 40 gallons. I was pushing the cart instead of pulling it when the front wheel hit a chunk of wood that had chipped off a pallet. All the milk crashed, and about 6 or 7 gallons broke open, spreading everywhere. It was a mess, especially since it was summer. We cleaned up as much as we could with mops and the floor machine, but we couldn't get it all. The back stockroom smelled like sour milk for a while. Story 88. I cut the tip of my finger off in a meat slicer while slicing deli meat for a customer. In my pain and haste, I completed the task, wrapped the slices, and handed them to her. Then I bandaged my finger. Later, they found the sliced ham on a shelf. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.